I will not be your mistress, your grace. Elena Cartwright's voice rang through the marble ballroom louder than she intended, yet once the words were spoken she refused to take them back. The musicians faltered mid-note. A ripple of whispers traveled beneath the chandeliers, and before her stood the most feared man in London society, Marcus Lennox, the Duke of Stonebridge, holding a velvet box in his hand as though it contained a promise instead of an insult. For a heartbeat no one breathed. Then Marcus closed the box with a quiet, decisive click. "So that is your answer," he said. His voice was calm, too calm, but Elena saw the faint tightening at the corner of his mouth, the first crack in the Duke's legendary composure. "My answer has not changed," she replied, lifting her chin. "You offer comfort without honor. I offer security," Marcus corrected coolly. "You offer a cage." Gasps spread through the room. No one spoke to a duke this way. Certainly not a bookseller's daughter with no title, no fortune, and no protection beyond her pride. Marcus studied her in silence. Tall, composed, dark-haired, and impossibly handsome beneath the glow of 100 candles, he looked every inch the powerful aristocrat London feared and admired in equal measure. And yet, for the briefest moment, something like regret flickered across his steel-gray eyes. "Think carefully, Miss Cartwright," he said quietly. "Many women would consider my offer generous. Then you should give it to one of them." And with that, Elena turned and walked out of the ballroom. She did not look back. 3 years later, London, 1825. Rain fell steadily along the Strand, tapping against the windows of Cartwright's bookshop like impatient fingers. Inside, Elena sat behind the counter balancing the day's accounts. Ink smudged her fingertips. A loose curl had escaped the careful knot of her brown hair. It was not the life of a duchess, but it was hers. 2 years earlier, when her father died, Elena had taken over the small shop alone. It had been terrifying at first, negotiating with suppliers, managing accounts, convincing skeptical customers that a woman could run a respectable business. Yet slowly, quietly, she had succeeded. The shelves were full, the ledgers balanced, and for the first time in her life, Elena Cartwright belonged entirely to herself. The bell above the shop door chimed. She didn't look up. "Good afternoon," she said automatically, dipping her pen back into the inkwell. Footsteps crossed the wooden floor, heavy, uneven, not the confident stride of a gentleman accustomed to London society. A traveler, perhaps, seeking shelter from the rain. Still, something about the silence unsettled her. The man had stopped moving. Elena lifted her head, and the breath left her lungs. Standing in the doorway was Marcus Lennox, the Duke of Stonebridge, the man who had once tried to purchase her heart with sapphires. 3 years had changed him. His dark coat was damp from rain, his hair slightly disordered by the wind. But that was not what made Elena's pulse stutter. It was his eyes. Once sharp and cold as winter steel, they now stared somewhere past her shoulder, unfocused, distant. And in his right hand he held a cane. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Marcus shifted slightly, tilting his head as though listening for something. "Elena," he said quietly. Her name in his voice felt like a memory she had buried alive. "You recognize my voice," she managed. "I would recognize it anywhere." He stepped forward. The cane tapped once against the floor, and Elena realized something that sent a strange ache through her chest. He wasn't looking at her. He couldn't. Marcus Lennox, proud, commanding, impossible Marcus Lennox, Bras was blind. "May I sit?" he asked. The question stunned her more than the blindness. The Duke of Stonebridge had never asked permission for anything in his life. "Yes," she said quickly, "2 steps to your right." He followed the sound of her voice, feeling for the chair before lowering himself carefully. The man who once commanded ballrooms now moved with quiet caution. Silence settled between them. Rain whispered against the windows. Finally Marcus exhaled. "You must be wondering why I came." It crossed my mind. A faint, humorless laugh escaped him. "Hunting accident 6 months ago." His fingers tightened around the cane. "The physicians say the damage cannot be repaired." Elena felt something painful twist in her chest. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be." Marcus lifted his face toward her voice. "I did not come for pity." "Then why are you here?" A pause, long enough for her heartbeat to grow uneasy. "Because," he said at last, "I need help." The words sounded foreign in his mouth. "And you were the only person I could think of." Elena stared at him. "Surely you have servants." "I do." "Friends?" "Very few." "Family?" "My brother tries." Marcus's jaw tightened. "But they all look at me as though I am broken." His voice dropped lower. "You never did." The room felt suddenly too small, too full of memories. What exactly are you asking, Your Grace? He inhaled slowly. I need someone to read correspondence, assist with estate matters, and occasionally help me navigate society. Elena's fingers curled slightly against the ledger. And you want me to do this? Yes. Why? Marcus hesitated. When he spoke again, the pride in his voice had vanished. Because you are honest. A small pause. And because I owe you more than I ever admitted. Elena swallowed. And if I refuse? His answer came immediately. Then I will thank you for your time. He rose carefully, finding the cane again. And I will never trouble you again. The door stood 6 steps away. He reached the threshold before speaking once more. Elena. She didn't answer, but he continued anyway. I was wrong that night. The rain outside had grown heavier. I was wrong about everything. Then the door opened, and Marcus Lennox disappeared into the storm. Elena stood alone in the quiet bookshop, her heart beating far too fast, because despite everything, despite the past, despite the pain, she already knew the answer she would give him, and it terrified her. The following morning, Elena Cartwright woke before dawn. For a long while, she lay staring at the ceiling of her small apartment above the bookshop, listening to the quiet murmur of London awakening outside. 3 years. 3 careful years spent rebuilding her life after Marcus Lennox had shattered it with one elegant, humiliating offer. And now he had returned. Blind. Broken in ways she had never imagined. Worse still, he had asked for her help. Elena pushed the blankets aside with a quiet sigh. The sensible answer was obvious. She should refuse. Marcus Lennox belonged to a world that had never truly allowed her inside it. A world of titles, expectations, and quiet cruelty wrapped in silk and diamonds. Even blind, he was still a duke, and she was still only a bookseller. Yet as she dressed that morning, fastening the crisp white collar of her navy work dress, Elena found her thoughts drifting not toward the past, but toward the way his voice had sounded in the shop. Hesitant, careful, almost vulnerable. Marcus Lennox had never sounded vulnerable before. That memory alone unsettled her more than anything else. By midday, Elena found herself standing in Berkeley Square. Before her rose the grand London residence of the bound Duke of Stonebridge. Tall windows, ivory stone columns, the sort of imposing aristocratic elegance meant to remind visitors exactly how small they were in comparison. She had been here once before. 3 years ago, Marcus had insisted on sending a carriage for her after one of their secret meetings in the gardens at Vauxhall. She remembered sitting stiffly beside him, staring at the mansion's entrance and knowing instinctively she would never belong inside those doors. Now she stood there again, only this time she had come by choice. Elena straightened her shoulders and knocked. Moments later the door opened. The butler studied her with professional neutrality. Miss Cartwright, he said smoothly. His Grace is expecting you. Of course he was. Marcus Lennox had always expected the world to move precisely where he wished it to. Still, Elena's pulse quickened as she stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of polished wood and old wealth. Portraits of stern ancestors lined the hallways. Every carpet muffled footsteps, every surface gleamed with quiet perfection. Yet beneath the elegance, Elena sensed something else. Silence. A house too large for the few voices that filled it. The butler guided her toward a pair of tall oak doors. The library, he announced softly. When he opened them, Elena stepped inside and stopped. The room was magnificent. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes. A ladder curved along the walls, and sunlight filtered through tall windows onto a pair of armchairs near the fireplace. And seated beside that window was Marcus. Without the armor of society, he looked strangely different. No embroidered coat, no ceremonial waistcoat, just a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled slightly at the forearms. His dark hair was unpowdered and slightly disordered. For the first time since she had known him, the Duke of Stonebridge looked almost human. Miss Cartwright has arrived, Your Grace, the butler announced. Marcus stood immediately, too quickly. His hand tightened briefly on the arm of the chair as he steadied himself. Elena? The relief in his voice startled her. Yes. A small silence passed between them. You came. I said I would consider it, she replied calmly. And you have? Elena reached into her pocket and unfolded a sheet of paper. I have conditions. Marcus's mouth curved faintly. That sounds promising already. She ignored the hint of amusement. First, she said firmly, this arrangement will be employment. Of course. I will work 2 hours each afternoon. Reasonable. I will be paid weekly. Agreed. And if I decide the situation is no longer appropriate, I leave immediately. Marcus nodded without hesitation. Accepted. Elena hesitated briefly before naming her requested wage. It was generous, but not outrageous. Marcus responded without even a pause. I will pay you twice that. She frowned. I do not require charity. It is not charity. His voice softened. It is payment for asking you to step back into a part of my life that once hurt you. For a moment, Elena didn't know what to say. The old Marcus Lennox would have argued. This man may simply acknowledge the past. Very well, she said quietly. Marcus exhaled slowly. When do you begin? Elena glanced at the mountain of unopened correspondence scattered across the desk. Now. A laugh echoed from the doorway. Well, thank heaven for that. Both of them turned. A younger man leaned casually against the doorframe. Tall, fair-haired, with the same Lennox features but none of Marcus's severity. Elena Cartwright, he said brightly. I have heard a great deal about you. Marcus sighed. Henry, must you appear exactly when dignity is required? Henry Lennox grinned. My dear brother, if I had to read one more agricultural report about barley production, I might have thrown myself from the balcony. Elena laughed despite herself. Henry clapped his hands together. Excellent, she laughs, I approve already. Then he gave her an exaggerated bow. Welcome to the only job in England more dangerous than handling Parliament. Marcus shook his head faintly. Please ignore him. Never, Henry replied cheerfully as he disappeared down the corridor. The door closed again. Silence returned, but this time it felt different, less tense. Marcus gestured toward the desk. There is the disaster. Elena crossed the room and sat down. She opened the first letter. A report from your estate in Cornwall, she began. As she read aloud, she noticed something unexpected. Marcus listened with intense concentration. His head tilted slightly. His fingers tapped thoughtfully against the armrest. Even without sight, he was still commanding the room. When she finished, he asked quietly, What do you think about the bridge repairs? Elena blinked. You're asking my opinion? You always had one. She hesitated, then spoke honestly. A broken bridge kills people. Marcus smiled slowly. Then we shall repair it. Elena reached for the next letter, and as she did, she realized something unsettling. Working beside Marcus Lennox again would not be easy, not because of the past, but because somewhere beneath the careful professionalism, her heart had not forgotten him at all. 2 weeks passed before Elena Cartwright noticed the change. At first, their arrangement remained perfectly professional. Every afternoon at precisely 2 o'clock, she arrived at the Lennox residence. Every afternoon, Marcus waited in the library, already seated beside the desk piled high with correspondence. She read. He listened. They discussed estate matters, investments, land disputes, and endless letters from distant relations who suddenly remembered their affection for the Duke of Stonebridge now that tragedy had softened his reputation. For 2 hours each day, Elena became his voice to the written world, and Marcus, despite his blindness, remained every bit the commanding mind she remembered. But something else had begun to shift between them, something quieter, something far more dangerous. Marcus had started recognizing her footsteps. You're late today, he said one afternoon before she had even spoken. Elena paused in the doorway. It's 2 minutes past the hour. A lifetime, he replied calmly. Her lips twitched despite herself. You're becoming dramatic, Your Grace. I learned from the best. Henry's influence, no doubt. Still, Elena moved toward the desk and began sorting the day's letters. First correspondence, she said, opening the top envelope. An invitation from Lady Thornbury. Marcus exhaled immediately. Decline. You didn't even hear the event. I do not attend charity dinners anymore. Elena continued reading anyway. Annual winter benefit for the Whitechapel Orphanage. Hosted at her Mayfair residence in 3 weeks' time. Decline politely. She lowered the letter slowly. You have declined the last 6 invitations. And society is beginning to believe the Duke of Stonebridge has disappeared entirely. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair. That may not be a terrible outcome. Elena studied him carefully. You are hiding. I am being practical. No, she said calmly. You are afraid. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus's fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. I lost my sight, Elena. Yes. I cannot navigate crowded ballrooms. You could learn. I cannot read the room. I can. He fell silent. Elena stood from the desk and crossed the room. The scent of rosewater followed her. She stopped beside his chair. You are still the Duke of Stonebridge, she said quietly. Titles mean very little when you cannot see the faces attached to them. Then listen instead. Marcus turned his head slightly toward her voice. His expression had grown thoughtful. I can describe the room, Elena continued. The people, their expressions, who approaches you, who whispers. You would do that? As part of my employment, she said lightly. He smiled faintly. You are remarkably persuasive for a bookseller. And you are remarkably stubborn for a man who once ruled half the ballroom floor. A small pause followed. Then Marcus asked something that surprised her. Why do you care? The question landed softly, but carried weight. Elena hesitated, because she had asked herself the same thing many times these past 2 weeks. She could have kept the answer simple, professional, detached. Instead, the truth slipped out. Because watching you disappear from the world infuriates me. Marcus's brows lifted slightly. Infuriates you? You were many things, she said quietly. Arrogant, proud, infuriating. That sounds familiar. But you were never a coward. Silence fell. Marcus slowly stood. It took him a moment to steady himself. When he turned toward her voice, his expression had changed. You called me Marcus, he said softly. Elena froze. She hadn't even realized she had done it. Forgive me, she said quickly. Your Grace? No. His voice was gentle but firm. Don't apologize. He took a slow step closer, guided by instinct and the faint sound of her breathing. I like when you say my name. Elena felt her pulse quicken unexpectedly. It reminds me, Marcus continued quietly, that I am still a person. Not just a title, not just a broken duke. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elena cleared her throat lightly. I will send the acceptance to Lady Thornbury. Marcus tilted his head. You are very confident. You need to leave this house, she replied calmly. And if I trip over someone's dress, I will warn you. And if I spill champagne, I will guide your hand. And if society laughs at me, Elena stepped closer. They will not. Marcus sensed the change in distance. How can you be certain? Because, she said quietly, they will see the same thing I see. And what is that? Elena hesitated. Her voice softened. A man who survived the worst thing life could take from him. And still stands. Marcus didn't speak for several seconds. Then he gave a small nod. All right. Relief flickered through Elena. The dinner is in 3 weeks. That gives you time to teach me how not to disgrace myself. She laughed softly. That will be lesson number 1. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, Elena realized something astonishing. The Duke of Stonebridge looked hopeful. Later that evening, after Elena had gone, Henry found his brother standing alone in the library. You look different, Henry said. Marcus folded his hands behind his back thoughtfully. Do I? Yes. Henry studied him carefully. You look alive again. Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, She reminds me who I used to be. Henry smiled faintly. Then don't lose her again. Marcus did not answer, but somewhere deep in his chest hope had begun to stir, and hope he was discovering was far more dangerous than... By the 3rd week of their arrangement, Elena Cartwright had learned something she had not expected. Marcus Lennox listened more than he spoke. The old Duke of Stonebridge had dominated every conversation. He had been sharp, confident, almost intimidating in the way he commanded a room. This Marcus was different. Blindness had carved quiet spaces into him, spaces where doubt lived, spaces where honesty slipped through. Every afternoon, Elena arrived at the library and found him waiting exactly where she had left him the day before. And every afternoon, those 2 hours passed far too quickly. You have another invitation, she said one day, breaking the seal of a thick cream envelope. Marcus groaned. Please tell me it is not another charity dinner. Unfortunately, it is. Decline. Elena sighed softly. Marcus. He tilted his head. Yes? You agreed to attend Lady Thornbury's dinner. Yes. And this one is the same week. Then decline it twice. She tried very hard not to smile. You are avoiding the point. And what point would that be? That the Duke of Stonebridge cannot vanish forever. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Watch me. Elena set the letter down carefully. Your estates require your presence. Parliament expects your voice. Society still revolves around your name. And what does society do when it sees me now? The bitterness in his voice surprised her. It stares. It whispers. It wonders how a man who once commanded every room now cannot find the door without assistance. Elena stood slowly. She walked around the desk and stopped beside him. You are wrong. Marcus gave a quiet, humorless laugh. You cannot know that. I do. How? Because I watched you before the accident. She hesitated. And I am watching you now. Marcus turned toward her voice. Then tell me what you see. Elena took a steady breath. I see a man who survived something most people would not. I see a man who still manages estates across England without ever reading a single letter himself. I see a man who is still terrifyingly intelligent. Marcus's lips curved faintly. That sounds suspiciously like praise. It is observation. A small silence followed. Then Marcus spoke again. You are kind. No. Her answer came immediately. I am honest. Marcus tilted his head slightly. Yes, he said softly. You always were. Elena moved back toward the desk and picked up another letter. This one is from your land steward in Yorkshire. She read the report aloud. Repairs, tenant complaints, a collapsed bridge near a village road. Marcus listened carefully. When she finished, he asked quietly, What would you do? Elena blinked. You are asking me again. You always have opinions. She sighed. Well, if a bridge collapsed, people could be injured. So repair it. Yes. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we shall. He paused. Then he said something that made Elena's breath catch. You were always better at seeing the truth of things than I was. She looked up. Marcus, I spent my entire life believing power made me wise, he continued quietly. I believed my title meant I understood the world better than others. His hands rested loosely on the arms of the chair. But the truth is, he gave a small, bitter smile. I was blind long before the accident. Elena's chest tightened. Marcus, I hurt you. The words came out softly, but they carried the weight of 3 years. I told myself it was practical. I told myself society would never accept you as my wife. I told myself I was protecting my family's reputation. He exhaled slowly, and in doing so, I insulted the only woman who ever spoke to me honestly. Elena felt her throat tighten. She had waited 3 years to hear those words. Now that they had arrived, they felt almost fragile. You apologized already, she said quietly. Not properly. Marcus turned his face slightly toward her voice. I offered you jewels. I offered you luxury. I offered you everything except the one thing you deserved. Elena's fingers tightened around the paper in her hands. And what was that? She asked softly. Respect. The word lingered in the room. Marcus stood slowly. He walked toward her carefully, guided by memory and sound. When he stopped, they stood barely a step apart. I was wrong, he said again. This time the words carried no pride, no arrogance, only truth. And if I could return to that night, his voice lowered. I would ask you to marry me instead. Elena's breath caught, but Marcus only shook his head faintly. It is too late for that. Silence filled the library. The past hung between them like a ghost neither could quite dismiss. Finally, Elena forced herself to speak. We cannot rewrite the past. No, but we can decide what happens next. Marcus considered that. Then tell me something honestly. She hesitated. Very well. Why did you agree to work for me? The question caught her off guard. You needed help. Marcus smiled faintly. That is not the real answer. Elena looked away briefly, because the real answer was far more dangerous. Finally, she said quietly, because part of me wanted to know if the man I loved ever truly existed. Marcus went still. And, he asked softly. Elena met his sightless gaze. I am still deciding. Marcus said nothing, but something in his expression shifted, something hopeful, something cautious. And Elena realized with sudden clarity, the past between them was no longer the greatest danger, the future was. Elena Cartwright had promised herself she would remain careful, professional, distant. But promises, she was discovering, were dangerously fragile things, especially where Marcus Lennox-Gunn was concerned. 3 weeks had passed since she began working at the Lennox residence, and somewhere within those quiet afternoons of letters and estate reports, the careful walls around her heart had begun to weaken. It happened in small moments, the way Marcus smiled when she challenged one of his decisions. The quiet concentration on his face when he listened to her read, the faint, thoughtful tilt of his head when he tried to picture something she described. It was not the arrogant Duke she had once loved. This Marcus was different, and that difference frightened her far more. You are quiet today. Mrs. Weatherby's voice broke through Elena's thoughts. Elena blinked, realizing she had been standing in the middle of the bookshop holding the same volume of poetry for nearly 5 minutes. I beg your pardon? The Duke, the older woman said knowingly. Elena sighed. It is complicated. Mrs. Weatherby gave her a sympathetic look. Love usually is. Elena froze. I did not say anything about love. You did not need to. The older woman returned a book to the shelf with gentle precision. I have watched you for 3 years, my dear. I know what heartbreak looks like. Elena leaned against the counter. He has changed. People do. He apologized. And? Elena hesitated. And now I do not know what to do with that. Mrs. Weatherby smiled kindly. Perhaps you simply listen. The advice followed Elena all the way back to the Lennox house that afternoon. Marcus was pacing when she entered the library. That alone told her something was wrong. What happened? She asked immediately. Yorkshire, Marcus said sharply. She moved toward the desk and opened the top letter. Estate accounts? Yes. Elena scanned the numbers quickly. These improvements cost £3,000. And achieved nothing, Marcus muttered. He is either incompetent or dishonest. Marcus turned abruptly and took a step forward. Too fast. His knee struck the edge of a small tea table. The tray wobbled. Porcelain cups rattled dangerously. Elena reacted instantly. Her hand caught the tray before it could fall. But the movement brought her directly in front of him. Marcus reached out instinctively to steady himself, and his hands landed on her shoulders. Everything stopped. They stood barely inches apart. Elena could feel the warmth of his breath. Marcus went very still. Elena, he said softly. Yes. Are you all right? Yes. But neither of them moved. Marcus's hands remained on her shoulders. Warm, strong, careful. I cannot see where you are, he murmured. I need to know. I am right here. Her voice had grown softer than she intended. Right in front of you. Marcus hesitated. Then slowly, very carefully, he lifted one hand. His fingertips brushed her cheek. Elena's breath caught. He was memorizing her, tracing the line of her jaw, the curve of her cheekbone, the softness of her skin. I miss seeing you, he whispered. The confession was so quiet she almost did not hear it. What do you mean? I remember your face, Marcus said. But memory fades. His fingers moved gently along her cheek. I cannot see if you are smiling. His thumb brushed her lower lip. I cannot see if you are angry with me. Elena closed her eyes. Her pulse was racing. You are nervous, Marcus said softly. How can you tell? Your heart. His hand shifted slightly until his fingers rested against her throat. Her heartbeat betrayed her immediately. Marcus exhaled slowly. Elena. She should step back. She should remind him of the boundaries they had carefully built. But she did not move. Tell me to stop, Marcus whispered. His forehead hovered inches from hers. If you say the word, I will. Elena knew the sensible answer. She always knew the sensible answer. But when she opened her eyes and looked at him, not the Duke of Stonebridge, not the man who once broke her heart, but simply Marcus, wounded, uncertain, hopeful, her resolve collapsed. Don't stop. The words escaped before she could think. Marcus kissed her, softly at first, tentatively, as if giving her time to change her mind. But Elena did not pull away. Instead, she reached for him. 3 years of unspoken longing collapsed into that single moment. The kiss deepened, warm, desperate, real. When they finally parted, both of them were breathing unevenly. Marcus rested his forehead against hers. Elena? Yes? Please do not leave again. His voice held something fragile. I could survive losing my sight. A quiet pause. But I do not think I could survive losing you twice. Elena swallowed hard, because the truth was painfully clear. She had never truly stopped loving him. I am not leaving, she whispered. But she lifted a finger gently against his chest. One condition. Anything. No more silence between us. No more guessing. Marcus nodded slowly. Agreed. He hesitated. Then he said the words that shattered what remained of her defenses. I love you. Elena felt tears sting her eyes. I never stopped. Her voice trembled slightly. You were a fool 3 years ago. Marcus smiled faintly. I know. But perhaps, she said softly, we both deserve another chance. Marcus kissed her again, this time slower, reverent, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. For the first time in 3 years, Elena allowed herself to believe that perhaps love had not been a mistake after all. The night of Lady Thornberry's charity dinner arrived with cold rain and restless nerves. Marcus Lennox stood in the center of his dressing room while his valet adjusted the final fold of his cravat. He had dressed for hundreds of ballrooms in his life, but tonight felt different. Tonight he could not see the room he would enter. Tonight he could not read the expressions of the nobles who would watch him walk beside a woman society still considered unsuitable. Tonight he would face the world blind, and somehow, that terrified him far less than the possibility of disappointing Elena. You are standing too still, Henry said from the doorway. Marcus sighed. I am contemplating the wisdom of this decision. You mean the wisdom of re-entering society with the woman you love on your arm? Yes. Henry folded his arms. You are a duke, Marcus. Yes. You survived being shot in the face. Marcus winced. That description seems unnecessarily vivid. You survived losing your sight. Yes. So surely you can survive one ballroom full of judgmental aristocrats. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Your encouragement is truly inspiring. Henry grinned. Good, now stop brooding, Elena is waiting. That sentence alone was enough. Marcus reached for his cane. I am ready. When Elena saw him descend the staircase moments later, her breath caught. Marcus wore a deep midnight blue coat, his dark hair neatly tied back, his posture tall and composed. To anyone watching, he looked exactly like the Duke of Stonebridge they remembered. Only Elena noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders. She stepped closer. Your carriage awaits, Your Grace. Marcus smiled faintly. You sound very formal tonight. Public settings require certain performances. And what happens when the performance ends? Elena gently slipped her hand through his arm. Then we are simply Marcus and Elena again. The carriage ride to Lady Thornberry's mansion passed in quiet anticipation. When they arrived, the butler's announcement echoed across the marble entrance hall. The Duke of Stonebridge and Miss Elena Cartwright. Every conversation in the ballroom faltered. Dozens of aristocratic heads turned at once. Fans paused midair. Gloved hands froze around crystal glasses. Elena felt Marcus's arm tighten slightly beneath her hand. Describe it, he murmured quietly. Large ballroom, she whispered. About 50 guests. Everyone is staring. Marcus nodded faintly. That sounds familiar. They stepped further inside. Whispers followed them like drifting smoke. The Duke. He truly is blind. And the woman with him? Elena kept her chin high. Lady Thornberry approaching, she murmured. Red gown. Very enthusiastic expression. Marcus smiled politely as the hostess swept toward them. Your Grace, Lady Thornberry exclaimed warmly. How wonderful to see you again. Marcus inclined his head. The pleasure is mine. And Miss Cartwright, Lady Thornberry continued kindly. I have heard you have been invaluable to His Grace. Elena curtsied gracefully. Only doing my part, my lady. Lady Thornberry smiled approvingly. Well, the Duke of Stonebridge appears very much alive tonight, and that alone makes the evening worthwhile. But not everyone in the ballroom shared that sentiment. A cool voice drifted nearby. How touching. Elena turned. Lady Peverley stood a few feet away, her expression sharpened with elegant cruelty. I had wondered who the Duke would bring tonight. She examined Elena slowly. The little bookseller. A few nearby nobles listened with obvious interest. Lady Peverley's smile grew thinner. I suppose blindness does make one less selective. The insult was deliberate, precise, and painfully familiar. Elena felt the old humiliation rise like fire in her chest. But she did not lower her gaze. Instead, she smiled sweetly. You are correct about one thing, Lady Peverley. The woman raised an eyebrow. Oh? Elena continued calmly. Marcus is less selective now. She took Marcus's hand gently. He no longer judges people by their titles. Her eyes met Lady Peverley's directly. He judges them by their character. A quiet murmur spread through the nearby guests. And unfortunately, Elena added softly, that standard eliminates quite a few people in this room. Lady Peverley's smile vanished. For a moment she had no reply. Elena turned away calmly. Champagne? She whispered to Marcus. Marcus squeezed her hand. I believe we have just won our first battle. Elena laughed softly. Then we should enjoy the victory. As they moved deeper into the ballroom, Marcus leaned closer. Tell me something honestly. Yes? Did Lady Peverley look shocked? Utterly. Marcus smiled. Then tonight was already worth attending. For the first time since entering the room, Elena realized something extraordinary. People were still watching them. But the whispers had changed. No longer cruel. Now they sounded curious, respectful even. And beside her, Marcus stood taller with every step. Not the broken Duke society expected, but a man reclaiming his place. And Elena realized with quiet certainty. The world was beginning to see him again. The music in Lady Thornberry's ballroom softened as dinner ended. Candles flickered along the walls, casting warm golden light across silk gowns and polished uniforms. Conversation flowed more freely now, but Elena could still feel the attention that followed Marcus wherever he moved. Yet something had changed. At first the room had watched with curiosity, then surprise. Now it watched with something closer to respect. Marcus Lennox had not hidden in a corner. He had spoken with landowners about railway investments, debated politics with 2 members of Parliament, and laughed openly with Lady Thornberry over a disastrous hunting story Henry had once told. And through every conversation he kept Elena beside him, not behind him, beside him. After the final toast, Marcus leaned slightly toward her. "Describe the room again." Elena smiled. "People are still staring. That is inevitable. But not the way they were earlier." Marcus tilted his head. "How so?" "They look impressed." A faint smile appeared on his lips. "Then tonight has been successful." Before Elena could answer, Lady Thornberry approached once more. "My dear Duke," she said warmly, "you must forgive me for stealing Miss Cartwright for a moment." Marcus nodded. "Of course." Lady Thornberry guided Elena toward the quiet conservatory just beyond the ballroom. The glass room was filled with lantern light and the soft scent of jasmine. "You handled Lady Peberly magnificently," the hostess said with clear satisfaction. Elena laughed softly. "I may have been a little sharp." "Good." Lady Thornberry squeezed her hand. "That man has needed someone sharp beside him for years." Elena blinked slightly. "You approve?" "My dear," Lady Thornberry said with a knowing smile. "Half of London spent years trying to marry him to suitable women." She glanced back toward the ballroom where Marcus stood speaking with several gentlemen. None of them ever made him smile like that. Elena followed her gaze. Marcus looked alive, truly alive. Lady Thornberry lowered her voice. "Whatever happens next, do not let society frighten you away." Elena nodded slowly. "Thank you." When she returned to the ballroom, Marcus immediately turned toward her. "Your footsteps," he said softly. "I would know them anywhere." Elena slipped her hand into his arm again. "Shall we leave?" "Yes." The carriage ride home was quiet. The rain had stopped. London streets glowed beneath lantern light as the carriage rolled through Mayfair. Marcus reached for her hand in the darkness. "Elena." "Yes?" "There is something I must say before courage fails me." Her pulse quickened. "What is it?" Marcus inhaled slowly. 3 years ago I offered you jewels. I remember. I offered you comfort." "Yes." "But I refused to offer the one thing you deserved." His hand tightened around hers. "My name." Elena's breath caught. Marcus continued softly. "I believed society mattered more than love. I believed tradition mattered more than truth. And losing my sight forced me to understand how wrong I was." He turned toward her voice. "Elena Cartwright." Her heart pounded. "I cannot see your face, but I know the shape of your hands." He lifted her fingers to his lips. "I know the sound of your laughter. I know the way the world feels different when you enter a room." His voice softened. "And I know I never want to live without that again." The carriage slowed outside the Lennox residence, but neither of them moved. "Elena," he said quietly, "I cannot offer you perfection. I will still spill tea." She laughed softly. "And I will still argue with your estate managers. I will still stumble over furniture. And I will still read you every letter you refuse to read yourself." Marcus smiled. "Then perhaps we are perfectly matched." He drew a steady breath. "Elena Cartwright." "Yes?" "Will you marry me?" The question hung between them in the dark carriage. For a moment, Elena could not speak. 3 years earlier, she had walked away from this man to protect her dignity. Now he was offering her everything he had once refused to give. His name, his heart, his future. Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. Marcus froze. "Truly?" "Yes." Her voice grew stronger. "Yes, Marcus." He pulled her into his arms, not like a duke claiming a prize, but like a man holding something precious. "You have no idea how long I have waited to hear that." Elena laughed softly against his shoulder. 4 years. Marcus kissed her gently. "I suppose I deserved the wait." They stepped from the carriage moments later. The Lennox residence stood quiet beneath the night sky. Marcus paused on the steps. "Elena?" "Yes?" "You once told me something." "What was that?" "That you would never belong in my world." Elena remembered. "I was wrong." Marcus squeezed her hand. "You do not belong in my world." She frowned slightly. "Then where do I belong?" He smiled. "In ours." And for the first time in her life, Elena Cartwright believed it, because sometimes the heart must lose everything before it finally learns how to see.